Jesus Santos. I'm the representative of the UN Regional Hub for Big Data in Brazil and IBGE. It's a pleasure to be your host today for the today's webinar organized by the Regional Hub in partnership with the ECLAC and the UN Task Team on Scanner Data. I look forward guiding you through this very engaging session. Today's topic, it's the UN Task Team on Scanner Data, System Architecture and Survey. This webinar has the objective to discuss the system practice for incorporation alternative data sources such as scanner data into the consumer price statistics. Since its creation, the task team has worked to provide and expand practical use of alternative data in statistics, providing guidance to countries on how to strengthen their IT infrastructure. During this webinar, we will explore the system architecture survey and how it supports those efforts. We are delighted to have Colin Brown with us today. Colin is a technical advisor in the Consumer Price Division at Statistics Canada. Over the past 4 years, he has led initiatives at every stage of the data value chain, focusing on enhancing systems that utilize alternative data sources for the Canada Consumer Price Index. And additionally, we will hear from Tanya Flower, who will also be contributing to this discussion. Colin will introduce Tanya during the presentation. Uh, I will say once again, thank you for both Colin and Tanya to be with us today and sharing their experience. Before we get started, some housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, okay? If you have any questions, please share them in the chat. We will dedicate some time at the end for question and answers. And to ensure the best experience for everyone, please keep our microphones muted during the entire session. Now, we would like to invite Colin and Tanya to begin the presentation. Colin, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Paulo. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'll start by sharing my screen. Let's do that. Is everybody able to see the slides?
Yes, CPI System Survey.
Yeah, that's the one. Perfect. All right. So thank you again for having us. So this presentation will be talking about our CPI Systems and Architecture Survey. It was created by myself and my colleague Steve Martin at Statistics Canada on behalf of the task team for scanner data. As Paulo said, we're more than happy to take questions, and I believe a lot of the folks here would have received an email with the survey itself, which will have my email, Tanya's, and Steve's. So if after the presentation you have questions, please feel free to email us. We're very happy to help. Okay, so I'll talk about what we'll be presenting today. So we'll kind of talk about first, like what the survey is about, why are we running the survey, what's the motivation. We'll talk about some of the key concepts and try to develop a bit of a lingua franca to talk about these things, because as we'll talk about shortly, these are very complicated systems and it's kind of hard to characterize. So we did our best attempt to try to give a universal diagram, universal language to make it clear for everybody. And then we'll walk through each page of the survey, which I believe a number of you will have already received. And then we'll kind of talk about what we're hoping to learn, what we're hoping to contribute back based on the knowledge learned. So I'll maybe start, with what the survey is about. So in short, what you maybe call this a socio-technical system, meaning it's a lot of different people, a lot of different software components, all interacting with each other for the purpose of producing some kind of output data. Of course, in this case, the consumer price index. So I'll define a lot of these terms later in the presentation, but basically what we're thinking about is sort of this flow of work going from raw input data to final output data. Again, for us, that's producing the consumer price index. And we're thinking about teams who own systems, and those systems pass data between each other. Those teams interact with each other. And what we're trying to do is, develop a common way to talk about that so that we can characterize these team and system organizations within CPI teams. So yeah, just to kind of summarize that, step one is to sort of characterize team interactions and system interactions, how these things are organized. Then after that, we try to identify some of the tools and practices and technologies currently in use to create and maintain these systems. And then what we would like to do is, based on those tools, practices, and organization patterns, try to infer how do these relate to certain business outcomes of interest. So improving quality, improving timeliness, things like that. And hopefully that can be the basis for some guidance on how to improve CPI systems around the world. So why are we running the survey? Sort of two main motivating factors here. The first is that there's a recent, as I'm sure you're all aware, desire to adopt more alternative data sources, but doing so requires a lot of expertise in a bunch of different skill domains. So like economics, statistics, computer science, it requires expertise in a lot of these and combining those together. Because of those multiple different skills involved, these tend to cut across organizational silos. So groups that would not maybe have traditionally worked together so extensively now have to in order to accommodate this new data. And the lifetime of these systems, this is true for other software systems in some cases as well, but certainly for CPI systems, their lifetime can span decades, maybe even a century or more, right, depending on where you're looking at. So they're very complex, very interdisciplinary, and very long-lived. So there is kind of an impetus to understand, characterize them, and figure out in what ways we can improve their maintenance. And then the second point too is, to the best of our knowledge, we're the first to actually do this in the context of CPI systems. Again, it's a fairly niche, bespoke thing, so that's not terribly surprising, but hopefully even basic descriptive statistics on these characterizations will hopefully be informative and useful. Okay, so now we'll talk about some of the key concepts. We'll kind of build up. I showed some diagrams earlier. I talked about teams. I talked about systems. So we're going to define those concepts now, and then show how these can be used to articulate an example of a CPI system. So we'll start with this definition of just a system as a whole. So for the purposes of this survey, we defined a system as an indivisible software component that takes one or more data inputs and transforms it to one or more data outputs. And we've intentionally defined this in a very open-ended way, because how this looks for different CPI teams can be very different depending on how they have set things up. For example, a system could be an Excel workbook, a system could be an R script, a system could be a Java application maintained by an IT team, or anything on that spectrum, right? It's just a piece of software that takes data inputs and transforms them to data outputs. And when I say indivisible here, what I mean by that is that a software component is considered a system if it runs entirely or not at all. And the reason for that, which we'll discuss later, is we want to talk about if we're making changes to these systems, can you make that change to one component without affecting another component? So that's where that concept of indivisibility or atomicity comes in. And we will see this shortly in the context of these diagrams. Okay, so the next thing we're kind of talking about here is I made a mention earlier to the concept of flow of work. So like that raw input data to final output data. And obviously how this looks for every team is going to be a little bit different. We tried to generalize based on the UN General Statistic Business Processing Model, I think is what that stands for. So we don't follow it exactly, but we try to follow it at a high level, and presumably most CPI teams are probably doing something similar to this. So the first step we kind of generalize here is we're calling it ingestion. And what we mean by that is getting acquired data into a machine readable state so that it's ready for further processing. So for example, this could, again, be a very wide range of things. This could be somebody observing a price in field collected data and entering it into a spreadsheet or a database or something like that. This could also be an arrangement that NSO maybe has with a retailer in the country, and maybe they once per week, for example, will send transaction logs of their stores, and then you ingest that into, like, say, a data warehouse or anything in between. The bottom line is it's about getting price transaction data, product price data, whatever that looks like for your organization, into a machine readable state so that you can do further processing on it. The second topic, or the second step, is what we're calling processing. So once the data are ingested, this is about preparing the data so that they're ready to produce elementary indexes. So for those who are maybe familiar with the term, you might call this data cleaning. So really, it's anything that's not, say, business logic or price index methodology logic, but getting the data ready so that you can start doing those calculations. Examples like removing missing values, correcting for common mistakes, maybe imputing missing values in certain circumstances. But it's not about doing the business logic. It's getting the data prepared in order to do the business logic. The third step we're defining here is called elementary indexes. And the idea here is once the data are ingested and processed, we're actually calculating an elementary index. So this would be like, I'm sure most of the folks here are probably familiar with the concept, but like just for example, depending on how each country defines it, you might have like a low level, like say the price of bread, the price of milk, or the price change in those product categories, let's say, the calculation of those price changes would be considered an elementary index. The fourth step we define here is aggregation. So again, it's going to look different for every country, but the key idea is like, say, for example, maybe you have bread, milk, and those roll up to food, let's say. So you want to know what is the price change in food. That's an aggregation of the component price changes of bread, milk, and all the other food products, for example. And then finally, we talk about finalization. So the idea here is to store those all those price relatives that we care about, and then for subsequent use, and then to actually disseminate as part of the consumer price index. So yeah, so now we kind of put those two concepts together: the concept of a system and the concept of those GSBPM steps into this diagram that kind of flows from left to right. So the interpretation here is sort of you start with input data. And again, that's going to look different for every organization. But the key idea is that you're starting with some upstream, say, raw data, and you're taking it through those 5 steps we talked about. And the output is the CPI. What is doing those transformations are one or more systems that pass data between each other. And as I mentioned earlier, the definition of this is quite open-ended. So a system can be, it can really be anything. It can be an Excel workbook. It can be a script. It can be a SAS program. It can be a Java program. It can, any software component that transforms input to output can be represented this way. And then for brevity, just to make the diagram simpler, you just use an arrow between one system to another to represent the output of one system becoming the input to the next system. So that's the flow of work concept. We also have this concept of a team, which we're trying to define quite simply as just a group of individuals who maintains one or more of these systems. The idea here is basically we don't want to put any limits on team sizes or what that looks like. So again, this could be one person who maintains one, say, Excel workbook. That would be a totally valid definition of a team. This could also be a group of several teams who maintain a very big system that handles a lot of the consumer price index for any of these steps or anything in between. So it's only important detail here is it's a group of individuals who maintains one or more of these systems. Some notes on this. One system can cut across multiple of these steps. So in the diagram shown on the screen here, what that looks like is the middle system does both data processing and elementary index calculation together. And what I mean by that is in this example, the system does both of those steps in one shot, so to speak. So it would not be, another way to say that is it would not be straightforward to make changes to the data processing part without also having to consider changes to the elementary index part. So that would be a couple, what we would call that is a coupling between those two concerns. Another note here is that more than one system can exist within a single step. So that's shown here under the data ingestion part. So the idea here would be you could have 2 or more systems all concerned with the data ingestion component for certain data. So for example, the first system could maybe be a script written in R. The second system could be a script written in Python. And the idea is maybe the R script reads the input data, does some activities to it, writes the output, and then the Python script reads it, does some other activities. And then that's kind of the final machine readable state of that data that's ready for future processing. So that's totally allowed here, and we've incorporated that into our diagrams. So another concept I want to talk about here is this idea of a domain aligned team. So the idea, so a team, same as what we defined previously, but the idea of a domain-aligned team is it's a group of individuals who are, in our case, it's functionally embedded within the CPI team. So the important detail here is that these teams and these groups of individuals will tend to have significant CPI domain knowledge. And why that, of course, is important is if we're building these CPI systems, it's quite helpful, obviously, if the people building those systems also have that expertise in domain knowledge. This is in contrast to what we would call a central team or a centralized team in the survey, which is a group of individuals who maybe have other skills or expertise, but they're centralized somewhere else in the organization. And but of course, by the nature of that, they're not going to have that domain knowledge of CPI and price methods. So an example of this would be a certain organization might have a corporate IT department, and that corporate IT department might provide certain services for the domain team, but the corporate IT folks are not going to have the knowledge and expertise of the CPI team, and understandably so. The point of being centralized is they're not part of any one domain in this case. So I use the different colors here, the light orange to show domain-aligned team and the light blue to show a centralized team. Okay, so putting all these concepts together, the goal of all of these pieces is to try to articulate a CPI production system using these components, and hopefully these components are flexible enough that no matter what your consumer price index production system looks like, it should hopefully be able to be represented or characterized with just these components is our hope. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of slides is just walk through each of these, walk through this diagram and kind of talk about what this might look like for a fictional CPI team. Obviously, everyone's diagram is going to look different. This is just meant to be an example of what this could look like for a representative organization. Okay, so the first step here is this data ingestion. And what's sort of shown here is there's a domain-aligned group of, let's say, economists and statisticians who are they're a domain-aligned team. They're in the CPI production team, and they maintain a single system to ingest a particular data source. But maybe there's a number of other data sources that are ingested by a central corporate IT team, and that corporate IT team maintains one system that manages the ingestion of the remaining data sources. So the second part shown here is the data processing and elementary indexes component. And what's shown here is this is handled entirely by domain-aligned teams, but the first domain-aligned team maintains one system that, like I was alluding to earlier, cannot be decoupled. So the one system does the processing and the elementary index calculation together. And it is not possible to just make an easy change to the data processing part without also having to consider the elementary index part. The bottom three teams have two systems, one for data processing, one for elementary indexes. And because they are shown as two systems, the interpretation here is this is completely independent from, the data processing part is completely independent from the elementary index part. So you can make a change to one without worrying about affecting the other. And then the bottom three teams all are similar. It's a domain-aligned team of economist statisticians maintaining systems characterized by the way I just described. Yes, I mentioned that already. And then finally, this aggregate and finalize step. The idea here is you have your aggregation and finalization steps, and there's, say, a corporate IT team maintaining one system that handles all of the aggregation and finalization for all of the upstream data sources. So that's that kind of rounds out the example of that diagram we were looking at up here. So again, that's just one example of what this could look like for a hypothetical CPI team. Every team is going to be different, obviously, but this is meant to just be an example to show what that could look like. And throughout the presentation, there are a number of descriptions that hopefully facilitate that exercise of building up these diagrams. Okay, so to conclude that thought, kind of what's the point of all this? As I mentioned earlier, the goal is what we're trying to do is introduce kind of a lingua franca through diagrams so that all CPI employees are able to express team and system organization and express these concepts of what you might call system architecture in the IT world, but in a way that's not making any strong assumptions about any particular way of organizing. It's just about the flow of data and systems and teams maintaining those systems. The second point, just to be very clear, our goal in the survey is not to try to create an exact replica of your CPI systems. We're trying to roughly characterize the important parts of those systems. So of course we want to we want to capture the key patterns, we want to capture the key themes, in what way are systems centralized or decentralized, but we're not expecting like a perfect recreation of these diagrams. They're just meant to be a tool to facilitate the communication of these concepts. Okay, so in this page, we're going to walk through each, so in this section of the slides, we're going to walk through each page of the survey. So we'll go through kind of step by step, and the point will be to talk about what we're trying to learn in each of these. So the first question, if you've gotten to that point, what we're trying to learn about is what we would call here system boundaries. So the systems we talked about, what GSBPM steps do they cut across, if any, or are they independent for each GSBPM step, or are there multiple systems within a GSBPM step? This is what we are trying to characterize and understand in this question. So most teams are going to fall between two extremes. So I'm going to show like visually what those extremes will look like. In practice, it's very unlikely any team will be one or the other. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But the one extreme would be what we would call a totally modular system. And the idea here is that every GSBPM step for every input or group of related inputs has its own system that's completely independent of the others. So, and presumably there's some team maintaining those. This could be domain aligned or centralized. The other extreme would be one single system that does all of the steps for all of the inputs. So that would be what you would maybe call a monolithic system. And again, it's unlikely that anyone's going to follow exactly the modular pattern, exactly the monolith pattern. But the idea is that most teams are going to fall somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. And that's what this first page of the survey is trying to learn about and characterize. The second question is about team boundaries. So basically what kinds of teams are involved in the development and maintenance of the systems in each of those steps? So again, this is quite hard to characterize because every organization is different. There's going to be different skills, different backgrounds. So we tried to roughly characterize it into these 5 categories, which I'll try to explain here. So the first category we're calling corporate IT, and the important information there is that it's people with an information technology background. So think like software engineering, computer science, something in that background. Their training, their education is in that, their work experience is in that. And the other important detail is that they're part of an organization-wide central group. So they are not a domain-aligned team. The second kind we're talking about is what we're calling domain-embedded IT. So again, these are IT professionals like we just discussed, but in this case, they are embedded in the CPI team. So they are part of a domain-aligned team. So that would be the difference between those two. The third we're talking about is what we're calling domain-embedded analysts. So this is meant to be sort of a catch-all for professionals who work on CPI who don't have a formal IT background. So for example, economists, statisticians, mathematicians, people with various backgrounds who are working on the subject matter analysis methodology of the CPI systems, but who don't have a training and background in IT. And just to be clear, that doesn't mean that these individuals don't have technical skills. They very well might have quite strong technical skills, but by training, they're not formally categorized as IT. But they are a domain aligned. They are part of a domain aligned team. The fourth one is meant to be sort of a catch-all for basically anyone who's not an IT professional who's also not on a domain aligned team. So we at least when we were making the survey, we could not think of too many situations where this would happen, but we wanted to have kind of an other category where if there is a situation that doesn't fall under these first 3, there's an option where people can indicate that it's somebody who's not an IT professional, also not in the CPI team, but they do perform some kind of development maintenance of systems on the CPI team. The fifth one is what we're calling external consultants or contractors. And the idea here is these are just professionals, IT or otherwise, outside of the organization to whom development maintenance work is contracted. So somebody who's not in the organization at all, but you've paid to do development maintenance in some way on one or more of these systems. So the third question, so this one is a little bit tricky, so I'll try to explain it here. What we're trying to do here is jointly characterize the team and system organization for a representative group of systems. So in a perfect world, what we would like to characterize here is page 1 was about the system organization independently. The second page was about the team organization independently. And in a perfect world, what we'd like to do is characterize these jointly However, of course, in a survey, this would not be practical. The question would become very long, very complicated, and very burdensome to answer. So we tried to simplify this by introducing a concept of a representative group so that you can think about how does the team and system organization look for a particular group of systems that are kind of representative in some way of what you do. That is sort of a vague term, and that's okay. What we're kind of looking for here is not like a meticulous definition of a representative group of systems, but more the respondent will likely see this and be like, oh yeah, I kind of have an idea. Yeah, like most of our systems sort of behave in this way. That's really what we're looking for here. Like just to have in mind something that represents an important part of your CPI workflow. And with that representative group of systems in mind, answer the questions about the joint system and team organization. Um, so yeah, I'll give an example building off the previous one of what that could look like. And again, this is just one example. This is not like the rule to follow. This is just to illustrate the concept. So in this example, I drew a red dotted set of lines around a subset of these systems. And the idea here is it's meant to show like a flow of inputs to outputs that all kind of follow the same pattern, so to speak. So yeah, basically the first system there, the idea is there's a subset of the inputs, excuse me, they all get ingested into this one system maintained by corporate IT. Then there's some number of systems. It doesn't matter how many, in this case 3, but it could be 5, it could be 10, it could be 20. Doesn't really matter. The point is all of those systems behave the same way. There's a system that does data processing, passes data to another system that does elementary index calculation, and then passes that on to the next step. And all 3 systems behave in the same way. They're owned by domain-aligned teams, and they all kind of follow that same pattern of one system passes data to the second system, passes data to the aggregation step. And then finally, in this case, there's another corporate IT team maintains one system that does aggregation and finalization, which of course takes all of the 3 inputs from those middle group of systems. And the idea here again is we're trying to if for those who have gotten to this point in the survey, what you'll notice is you'll say like, okay, for your first system group in mind, characterize X, Y, Z for your second system group, and then once you have that in mind, you can then answer questions. Well, for that particular group of systems, how does the team organization look like? And then that way you can actually jointly look at these together instead of in isolation, where you can't really make inferences about how they work, how they interact together. So anyway, takeaways here. Like I've repeated several times, what we're really trying to do is in any question in the survey, try to get a sense of can we in any way characterize the team and system organization. That's very hard to do, but this is our attempt at it. And again, the second thing I'd maybe say is just don't overthink the question. Like I said, we're not looking for a super meticulous definition of representative group. We just want the respondent to think about like whatever their CPI system looks like. We just want them to sort of think like, oh, okay, yeah, there's an important part of our workflow. Maybe it's 60% of the CPI by expenditure weight, and all of those steps kind of look like this. That's really what we're looking for. So again, it doesn't have to be super precise. We're just looking for that high level characterization. Okay, so then the next page. So the next set of questions are a lot more straightforward, I think. So page 4 is just about tools and technologies. So it's pretty clear in the questions, just what tools, what technologies, and what practices are you using to develop and maintain these systems. Page 5 is about the age of the systems and the update frequency. One thing I'll maybe mention here is throughout the survey, you'll see terms like, for example, how often are the majority of systems updated, or for a typical system, how long does it take? So again, just to sort of be clear here, in a perfect world, what we're trying to do is characterize a distribution of these characteristics. Again, that would be very impractical to ask respondents for every system you have, tell me this property, that would not be feasible. So what we're trying to do is to simplify that, say like, think about the majority of systems. So, or the typical or the modal system, if that makes more sense. So again, we're not looking for an extremely precise characterization. We just want the respondent to think like, oh yeah, most of our systems work that way. Therefore, my answer to this question would be, and that's a totally exactly what we are going for. So anyway, for this question and a number of others, just when you see the term majority, I just want to clarify that. So what we're looking for in this page is how old is the system, and approximately what is the frequency, so how old is the majority of systems, and at what frequency are the majority of those systems updated? So, and again, the other thing I'll flag here is a lot of these answers for the sections to come are coarse grained, meaning we're bucketing them. So we're not looking for like, the majority of systems are updated every 7 days, 4 hours, 30. Like what we're really looking for is like, is it once a week? Is it once a month? Is it once every 2 months? So the answers are those coarse grained intervals. And so that's meant to just be, if you don't know the exact number, but roughly, that's totally fine. You can just indicate the bucket that your update frequency falls under. And same with system age. So then the 6th page is about the number of individuals who are needed to implement changes. So in the survey, it will talk about a small change and a large change, and presumably the number of individuals might be different. But again, the idea is for a typical system in the organization, on average, how many individuals need to participate in an end-to-end change. Again, that'll be explained more precisely in the survey, but that's what this question is about. How many people need to participate in the end-to-end process of making a change? Page 7 is about obstacles and challenges to alternative data adoption. So what we're trying to understand here is kind of, is there what we would maybe call an implementation gap? So in the adoption of alternative data. So ideally here, if a number of organizations all face similar challenges, then that's good to know because we can provide targeted guidance, advice, and help to reduce those most salient challenges that are being faced. So page 8 is about how long changes take to do. So again, thinking about the typical system for small changes and large changes, on average, how long does it take to do a change end to end? So yeah, that's it'll be, again, more details will be given in the question itself, but that's kind of the high level. So page 9 is regardless of alternative data, this is just a CPI question in general. What are the general challenges facing these CPI teams? So this is an opportunity to sort of rank. We tried to get about, I think it was like 15 or 20 challenges that are pretty common to, we expect might be common to most NSOs. And for those challenges, it's kind of an opportunity for the respondent to rank like, oh yeah, that's a quite important one, that's a next important one, and then maybe at the bottom, like these ones actually we don't have, we don't face so much. And what we're again trying to learn here is if a bunch of National Statistics Organizations face similar challenges, then of course we can provide targeted advice to help provide a guidance aid and so on to address those most prominent challenges. Pages 10 and 11. So page 10 is just a general feedback form. It's plain text. And the idea here is there's only something to the tune of like 200 NSOs, right? So we will personally read any feedback put here. So anything you want to write, whether that's like about the language used in the survey, terminologies being unclear, maybe there's something important that you feel was missed. Any feedback in general, you can write it here, and we will personally read it over and take that into account. So yeah, just any feedback there that is not part of the survey, you're welcome to include. And then page 11 is an independent component, and it's about the task team on scanner data more generally, which Tanya will talk about in a couple of minutes. I'll provide an introduction for her before she does. And then the idea is, it's a number of questions about how what the test team is doing, and are there any areas that we can expand upon, improve to most in the most targeted way help users. And again, Tanya will talk about that in more detail. Okay, so just to conclude this, what we're kind of hoping to learn in this survey in the following order of likelihood. The first thing we're definitely hoping to do is just provide some descriptive statistics about these characterizations. Like I said at the beginning, we, to the best of our knowledge, this hasn't been done before. So even just like, what was the distribution of answers for each of these questions across all the NSOs will hopefully be insightful in some way or another. The second thing we're quite likely able to do is discover what we're calling archetypes for organizations. So what we're expecting to happen, and this is to be determined, is that groups of national statistics agencies will fall into certain patterns or common patterns would be the way to say that. For example, maybe one pattern is like, there's a corporate IT team who maintains several very large centralized systems. Maybe another pattern is like there's teams who use open source tools, technologies, and maybe they develop more modular systems. Maybe there's a third where smaller teams don't need the complexity of the former two I mentioned. So they have a very streamlined process with just one system per category. Obviously, we will learn this based on the responses to the survey, but we're expecting to see certain archetypes, as we're calling them. And ideally, what we would like to do is for these archetypes, and even just generally from like characteristics to outcomes, can we correlate these archetypes and characteristics with these business outcomes of interest? So, for example, maybe teams that have a certain, I don't want to bias any of the answers, but like we might find a certain characteristic is correlated with very fast change times, right? So maybe that would be like, hey, what? It kind of prompts the question, why might that be happening? Perhaps that's something worth investigating. It's unlikely we're going to be able to make any meaningful causal inference, so to speak, but we are hoping to find some interesting correlations between those characteristics and those outcomes, and then those can kind of prompt further investigation is sort of the idea. So anyway, that concludes the presentation. I'm very happy to take questions, and I'll just briefly introduce Tanya, who's here with me. She's the chair of the scanner team on the test team on scanner data. So she'll be presenting an overview of what the whole task team is doing, the various work streams within that task team, and some of the priorities and projects worked on throughout. So I can pass the floor to Tanya, but I'm not sure if we want to do questions for both of us at the end, or questions for me, then Tanya, then questions. I guess, Paulo, that's whatever you would prefer there.
Let's pass to Tanya, and then we go to the questions. I have a couple of questions for you as well, and for you and Tanya, maybe you can share that information.
That sounds great. Perfect. So yeah, Tanya, over to you, and then we'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and thanks, Paolo, for hosting us today. I appreciate we've thrown a lot of information at you in the last 40 minutes or so. So just to say, we will be circulating the slides that Colin presented and that I'll be presenting shortly in around to all attendees. You've obviously got the recording as well. So happy to take any follow-up questions. As Colin says, you've got the contact details in the link. But yeah, I appreciate there was a lot of information included in that summary, so it might take a while to think through it all. But yeah, happy to take questions at a later date as well. So I'll just share my screen quickly. So hopefully you can see my slides.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. So hi, yeah, as Colin said, my name is Tanya Flower. I'm the chair of the UN task team on scanner data. Just a quick background on where I work. So I'm at the Office for National Statistics in the UK. I've worked in prices for the last 10 years or so now, largely around our transformation projects, so bringing in these new data sources into consumer prices. But I work quite closely with the production teams as well. So for those of you that haven't heard about the UN task team on scanner data before, a bit of background about where we've come from. So we were formed in 2017 as part of a general UN strategy to increase the usage of big data for official statistics. So there is a whole kind of work stream on this. Other task teams include mobile phone data, Earth observation data. You may be aware of that anyways through the work of the UN regional hub in the area. So I've just linked here up to the main page there. So the role of all the task teams, there's kind of shared objectives around drafting methods guidance in the particular area of focus, supporting that method guidance with code and documentation in that space, and also developing training material as well to support the use of these big data sources. Specifically for the UN task team on scanner data, we did a bit of a refresh last year now, looking at our aims and objectives, kind of setting ourselves up for the next 2-3 year period. The aim is pretty similar, so we're there to enable and expand the usage of alternative data sources, including scanner data in consumer prices statistics, but not restricted to scanner data. So web scraping, admin data is within our remit as well. I have linked to the homepage here, just to note that that homepage is still a little bit out of date. I haven't included the 2024 kind of refreshed objectives and work streams on that homepage yet, but there is some background information on that homepage if useful. So just to, as I said, we did that refresh. As part of that refresh, we've introduced a couple of principles to the work as well. So first is on timeliness. We want to make sure that any content produced by the task team remains up to date with current discussions in the field. And to that end, we will be supported by a secretariat function who will be responsible for maintaining that existing published content. That secretariat function will actually be placed at the regional hub in Brazil. So looking forward to working a bit closer with that in future. The other principle underlying our objectives is around the informed choice. So as Colin says, there is no one template that all national stats organisations follow for the production of consumer prices. And for that reason, different approaches, different methods may be better in one situation than another. So it's not for the task team to recommend a single best approach that we think everyone should be following. We're there to produce guidance and information really to make it easier to make an informed choice for whatever is best for your particular circumstance. So that's what the principles are there. In terms of the objectives, linked through to the wider UN working group, we've got we want to be a repository of information, using end-to-end methods and processes of using these data. We don't want to duplicate existing information where it's already available. So obviously the UN the ILO manual is a really good source of information for consumer prices and production. So don't want to duplicate that, but we will just reference existing material when it's available. Where it's not available, so where there are gaps in that international literature, so for example, classification is an area that we identified as needing a bit more focus on, we will draft that methods documentation and include that in our published literature. We want to really focus on practical implementation, hence the one of the drivers for what we're doing today with the architecture survey. We want to be able to provide advice about how to implement these in a live production setting, and obviously the training work stream runs along all of those. So all of the guidance that we'll be producing, we will also be producing training material for. So this is just a summary slide with the list of work streams, but I will go into a bit more detail for each of those now. The first work stream that we actually completed last year is the handbook. So you may have already seen this. I'll just click on the link quickly and show you it's one of those. Here's what I did earlier. So this is the published handbook with the link. As you can see, it has a lot of information in it, all the way from the beginning of acquiring the data source to calculating price indices, and also then implementing these new data sources in consumer prices. So it's one of those where it's a work in progress. There is content that is being added to it as we go through. For example, I mentioned classification. There is some information on this page at the moment, but we will be expanding that documentation at a future date. But there is hopefully enough in there still that it will be a useful resource, kind of regardless of those updates ongoing. So please do check that out. I'll just go back to sharing my slides. So we're not planning any specific updates within this workstream specifically, but the handbook material will just be constantly revised. I mentioned the secretariat function going forwards as well. So have a look at that. The other work streams that we've got in place are the classification work stream. As I said, that will be published via the handbook when it's available. The idea there is providing guidance on how you can classify alternative data sources for consumer prices. We are aiming to provide the remaining content by April this year via that handbook link. We've got the training work stream. So also on the handbook, you'll be able to see the curriculum of proposed training content. It's aligned to the handbook chapters. So there will be training courses on data acquisition, for example, price indices and so on. Timelines for that, we will also have an update in April for the data acquisition and price indices courses, and also hopefully a timeline for when other chapters will be in development as well. The system architecture work stream, so this is why we're here today, the work that Colin talked us through. We are here to do that survey and promote the survey. In terms of timelines, we are hoping to present on the results of that survey by the April. There's a meeting, the UNEC meeting, that we have an agenda item at. But more generally, the results will be published via our handbook as well, so accessible to all people who have submitted responses and online as well. So that we're aiming to turn that around quite quickly to get the most value out for people. We also have a work stream on FAIR data. So this is the principles of findability, accessibility, interpretability, and reusability, which combined makes the FAIR principle in this space. Specifically in this work stream, we want to develop a data catalog tool for open data sets. And the idea being that there is obviously a lot of research done in this space and consumer prices, but it's quite difficult sometimes to reproduce those findings, or for countries just starting out to get example data sets to apply their methods to. So we want to make that a bit easier for people to access via this tool, and also some guidance around how people can apply these principles in their research. Timings on that is also April at the UNEC meeting. We'll produce an update on that work. Longer term, there are some other things that we would like to do. It depends a little bit around resource capacity. The task team is entirely voluntary by people who are doing very busy day jobs as well. So it is always a bit of a balance about what we can achieve, but hopefully these are some of the longer term things to look out for. For example, a discussion forum, be really good to have a way that people can share questions and share knowledge for certain topics in an easy to access forum. So we're looking at that, and a seminar series as well, which will probably be done in collaboration with these regional hubs. So we presented with the African Regional Hub yesterday. We would want to create some kind of network there with this seminar series to promote that as well. And then some of the other things around code notebooks and other uses of these data sources as well. They're probably a bit further down the priority list, but when we get a bit of time, we'd look into that as well. So I'll ask for you today, obviously, to complete the main section on the architecture. Will really enable us to get a better idea on the challenges that people are facing in their IT development, and some of those comparisons that Colin pulled out. I would add as well, actually, I've just been thinking about starting our contribution from the ONS systems side, and it's just actually quite a useful exercise anyway to be able to visualize your systems in the way that Colin has described and identify those pinch points and start thinking about how the teams interact and so on. So even if you don't complete the survey straight away, like it's just a really nice visual exercise anyway. So yeah, I think that would be really helpful. So yeah, please complete the survey questions. The task team questions at the end would be helpful to get your feedback on things that would be good for us to focus on in our longer term planning, what the key priorities are, any suggestion on topics. Also, as I said, being on the task team is a voluntary basis. So if any of that sounded interesting and you'd like to get involved, for example, Colin will be needing some support to analyze the results of this survey if anyone's interested in that, and writing up that report. So some of those are available, and obviously the training task team is an ongoing process producing that material as well. So please do get in touch. Also, if you have any other feedback and suggestions, more than happy to have those questions come in. I think that is it. So yeah, just to say again, thank you very much for having us. We will hopefully be doing a few more of these webinars during the year as we introduce the new training material. For example, we would like to come and promote that with you guys. But yeah, that's it for today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tanya. As we wrap up, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Colin Brown and Tanya Flower, for their invaluable insights and all active participation. I think with today's session has provided us a clear understanding how scanner data and system architecture can improve consumer price statistics globally. We have one person at the audience with a question, which is Veronica Santos. I think her microphone is working. I think she raised her hand. Maybe she has a question. Veronica, can you hear us? Can you use your microphone or chat? Maybe she's not being able to. Okay. Okay. I have a general question, which might be for both Tanya or Colin, which is, what advice would you give to countries just starting to explore the use of scanner data in their system architecture?
So good question. Tanya, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it would be difficult to give one bit of advice because it's such. I think it is generally more complicated than when you're starting out. It might originally appear. So possibly if you're right at the beginning of the journey, don't be afraid to take that time to kind of collect as much information as possible before deciding which categories to target, which routes to go down. We have tried to make that information guidance available in the handbook, so please have a look at that if you're just starting out. But don't underestimate the the time required. I think sometimes it's I don't know how it is elsewhere, but our sometimes directors of consumer prices are like, yes, alternative data sources will solve all problems, whereas actually they can, and there's a lot of really good things that can be brought in with the use of alternative data sources in terms of improvements and benefits, but the job of getting them in and the projects, you need to make sure you have the right resources, you have the right teams in place to be able to fully utilize them. So hopefully the information available in the handbook will allow you to have those kind of conversations with your team leaders. If you've got a director coming in and pushing you for advances in this area, you can go back and say, look, well, very happy to take this challenge on board, but we do have to make sure we have the right IT behind us, the right team sizes, the kind of skills in place for that to be able to be done correctly, and to the quality as well, right? The quality is important. So sorry, that was a bit of a
That's a very good answer. Thanks a lot, Tanya. And you mentioned accuracy and reliability. Do you have any tips from how to ensure or improve the reliability of those alternative data sources?
I think in terms of there are different approaches that you can take. So one possible approach is to do using these new data sources. You can do a kind of two-stage approach to implementing. So the first approach would just be a kind of direct replacement of your existing sample using these new data sources. So that means you're not kind of changing existing methods, systems, like you can just do a one-for-one kind of subbing out of the product quotes. I think it's really important to build familiarity with these data sources over time in order to kind of not affect that quality. So that's a really good way where you can start familiarizing yourself with the data, see what products are in there, but it's not a kind of huge change in methods and perspective. So that will enable you to kind of build those skills to begin with, and then you can down the line start thinking about a bigger change to using more of the data and introducing those things like multilateral methods to calculate the price indices. So that's probably the first thing. In terms of quality and accuracy, do the curiosity checks on the data as well. It sounds really obvious, but we got caught out because I think some of our expenditure was coming in from a scanner data retailer, and it was multiplied by 7 because it was daily data, and we just didn't like. It was one of those things that we wouldn't have noticed unless we were doing those curiosity checks on the data. So take that time to begin with to understand the data, ask those kind of do those basic checks and find out what's happening there. Parallel runs are really helpful as well. So once you've built the systems and you kind of got it in live, doing that comparison, allowing that time where you're running or doing some kind of impact analysis to check that the data is showing the trends that you would expect, because it's new data, but we are still measuring the same inflation, right? So they shouldn't be too dissimilar in terms of the trends that they are showing. So that's another kind of useful tool that we found.
Thanks for sharing with us, Tanya. We have for closing, we have 2 questions. 2 persons we asked to speak. One is Diego and the other is Milena. I will hand to Diego and Milena, and then I will finish the question and answers because of the time. But if you have questions, please don't hesitate to send us by email, but we will be glad to forward them to both Tanya and Colin. Okay, let me pass to Diego and Milena. Well, and can you hear us, Diego? Maybe some people are just raising their hands by a mistake because, let me see. Diego, can you hear us? Let's try Milena then. Milena, can you hear us? Do you have a question that you would like to share with us? Well, I'm seeing those participants with the raised hand, but they might having technical difficulties to present their questions. So if you want to send the questions for us in the future, please feel free, Diego and Milena, to share with us. Well, thanks everyone again for joining us. I hope everyone leaves today's webinar with fresh perspectives and actionable ideas, and I wish you all have a very great day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.